you see wildlife and you get that rush of adrenaline, if that's a pine marten or if that's an otter or if that's a kingfisher flying down a riverbank. So I definitely do think that there's something spiritual there.
Welcome to Nature Magic. Today I'm speaking to Conor Ruane. Conor is a community water officer with the local authority's Waters programme, covering Galway and South Roscommon. He works with voluntary groups to support projects focused on the protection of rivers, lakes, coastal and groundwater. Conor previously worked as a freshwater ecologist, carrying out ecological surveys and river restoration works. Conor is managing the East Galway Water Biodiversity Project that I have been attending, a citizen science project that gives the public simple tools to check water quality and identify pollution sources. Through kick tests that disturb the riverbed, aquatic invertebrates are netted and counted. The three good guys, the stonefly, flattened mayfly, and green caddisfly, are scored against the three baddies, the waterlouse, leech, and snail, to give a traffic light score of poor, moderate, or good. And speaking up for the rivers and the waterways, and where are you talking to us from today?
Thanks very much, Mary, for having me, and hello to all your listeners. I'm actually calling from Foxford, County Mayo, which is where I'm from at the minute. This is where I've grown up, I suppose. I do cover Galway and South Roscommon, though. So anybody listening out, please don't hold it against me that I'm from Mayo.
Well, I think we've now, with COVID, we've been put back in our box on Zoom now. With some restrictions and things, so it's very annoying. But there's lots of projects, lots of things going on. And the way I met Conor is there's a wonderful project in East Galway called the East Galway Water Biodiversity Project. Is that right?
Yep, training. Yeah. Yep.
And there's training, and we've been looking at water quality in the area. So we're going to go over that. But first of all, how did you get into the environmental line of work?
Well, I suppose without giving you my whole life story, I grew up here in a garden nursery, and both my parents were very much involved in horticulture. So my dad would have been a landscaper, and my mum worked in the Botanic Gardens in Dublin, and we grew up in a town in Foxford here in Mayo. And so when I was very young, I was always going out about with mum and dad, working with plants, getting to know the different names of plants, digging up soil and trying to look at all the different insects. I have a very vivid memory of being out with my dad, and he dug up some soil, and that devil's coach horse beetle dropped out of it. And I remember being stunned at the time as a kid and just being totally obsessed about this beetle that looked like a scorpion almost.
Yeah, absolutely. People are always putting it up on Facebook going, what's this? I just found it. And it is really intimidating looking.
Yeah, so I suppose I've always had a vivid interest or a high interest in nature, and I come from a town that's on the Moy, on the River Moy, and fishing is a big part of, I suppose, the culture of the town and the economics of the town. And we've lots of really nice lakes and lochs around us, such as Loch Con, Loch Cullen, Callow Lake. And I would have spent years, I suppose, in summer times as a kid fishing those lakes and not catching much, in fairness, but enjoying the time out and about as a kid. So that's kind of how I really got an interest in the freshwater side of things, you could say. And I've always had an interest and that's that. I suppose I started working in ecology after school, then after college, and I worked as an ecologist for different companies and sometimes different state agencies on lots of different projects. And then I joined LAWPRO nearly a year and a half ago. So.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful around there with all the lakes and everything. And how is the fishing these days?
So the Moy system would actually be still one of the best in the country. Now, anecdotally, over the years it has dropped. Like I suppose with the Moy drainage, and some people would tell me that it changed after that. But it's hard to quantify because we don't have baseline data maybe from before that. But I know last year I think they had a patchy enough season. It's very much dependent on the weather and the run and the fish and that sort of thing. But I suppose fish species around the country are under pressure, because it's all linked, I suppose, to water quality and habitats and the deterioration of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why this project, which I'm on at the moment, is so interesting, because it's a citizen science stream index project. So anybody can get a net and see the little creatures like the flattened mayfly and things like that, and see the quality of the water and log it. So you're training a few people who are then going to train more people in the community, and we'll get all these bits of data across the country and see exactly what is happening. And, where there's outlets of sewage that have been unnoticed, you'll see a drop in the quality. There could be a pipe under a bush that, is happily discharging away.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, like it's just about having more eyes on the ground, I suppose, and the more people that are, and even, if you're down at a site and you might see something that might be untoward or serious pollution, you can always phone that into the council then, so it's about reconnecting people with their water body again and getting people out there, to do it and this data that we're recording, it is verified by UCC, so it's not just an awareness tool, it's something that, we can, as you said, local people can do, and we can hopefully log it then in a catchment setting and use that data then to establish how our smaller streams are surviving. So it's going to be a really valuable tool for local communities and agencies going forward, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's tried and tested, and it's very easy for people to do, and it's also a lot of fun. I mean, we've had a lot of fun on the field trips doing it. And so interesting seeing what's there. And Kieran, who's doing the course on the Zoom course, told us about the app See It, Say It, which is the EPA app now that you can just log on to, and you can report if there's a pollution instance or dumping or something like that.
That's a very useful app. I've used that myself. If it's within hours, if you've spotted pollution during the daytime as well, you can always ring up your environmental county council or the environmental section of your county council. They have the legislative powers to inspect it. If you're using the See It, Say It app, it will eventually get to the right people. If it's the council, it will get to them. So that's very useful as well. So there's kind of, I suppose, different avenues to report different types of pollution, but if it's water pollution, the environmental section of the county council would have a remit under the Water Pollution Act. So if it's a serious thing, ring in rather than put it through the app.
So just finding out a bit more about you. Have you got a favorite plant or animal?
I do. This is a very hard question.
It is a hard one. No one likes answering this one. But it's just really to talk about something that you're interested in or really catches your imagination.
Of course, yeah. No, I suppose I would have spent a few years, as I say, as an ecologist, carrying out surveys on rivers. And an animal that really interested me was the otter, and largely because you wouldn't see it, like it's a nocturnal animal. You might see the signs, or you might be out the morning on a riverbank and you'll see the prints, but you largely won't see it, or you might see it spraying. And it has this kind of mysterious quality about it, it's a sign of a healthy river. I suppose it needs fish populations to survive. It had been, a very much predated and hunted species in the past, and the populations were down across Europe. Thankfully, it's coming back in Ireland, and we have healthy populations in Ireland. And it's a pretty cute animal. My book when you see them playing in that.
They're lovely. On my 50th birthday, my husband borrowed a kayak because I wanted to go around Kinbarra Bay, and I'd heard there were otters by the old castle, so that's the ruin on the other little island. And so we're getting into the kayak, and we met a couple of people, and they're like, "Oh, you'll never see otters," and they're not there anyway, but you'll never see them. Right. So we paddled around the corner of the castle, and the next thing, a little head popped up. I was I was chuffed.
Wow,
so amazing.
In all my time, I've only ever seen one once or twice, So it's there, and when you do see them, the kind it really stops you dead in your tracks, and yeah, and I suppose you have that lovely connection with them then. Like, and the first time I seen one was up in Donegal, and it must have been a juvenile because it was quite small, and it they have this lovely ability to glide in the water, you know, and not break the surface of the water. And it swam over this weir, and it was so I suppose they look more elegant inside water than they do outside water. And it just nipped across this weir, and before I knew it, I was like, that was an otter. You know, and it was already gone downstream.
So dynamic with the water, it just
Yeah,
flows with the water.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I had looked into doing rescue and release, a rescue and release project here for otters, because we've got the Turlock, we'd have to build a little facility. And then when I looked into how, obviously, if we get some rescued otters, because they have to be kept for about a year, because apparently they have no common sense for a year.
Okay. Yeah.
And they're liable to do anything after a year, they're like grown up. But you have to keep them for a year, otherwise they haven't a hope. But the amount of fish they eat, so there'd be a big fundraising drive for fish if we did get them. It hasn't happened yet, but I would love to try and help them out.
Yeah, no, they're lovely. They're amazing creatures. Like and there is that whole I don't know if you've ever heard of the dobhar-chú kind of legend out in Omey Island.
No,
so apparently
tell us about it.
Yeah, I don't know huge. I'm not a historian or a folklore expert, but this kind of caught my imagination, and I don't as an ecologist, I don't believe in this animal now, but it is a very nice story. So it's the dobhar-chú, but it apparently it was a 7 to 8 foot long dog otter that lived out in Omey Island, and there was a few different sightings over the years of it, and it goes back in the old Irish history as like this half otter, half dog creature. I think it means waterhound, and it was known to have like done, you know, killed many a person on the side of a beach or river or that. And I suppose it's kind of one of those stories that kind of captures the imagination. I suppose it might have been, you know, people just out and about at night time that might have seen a dog otter, but then because they're out at night time, their imagination takes over, and it goes from 4 feet long to 7 feet long, you know, to 8 feet long. So
who knows? Where's Omey Island?
Omey Island is off the coast of Galway. So it's out in Cleggan Bay. And it's an island that you can reach at only at certain times because it's tidal, and there's a sandbar that goes out to it. But like history on the island goes back 3,000 years. Like there's old settlements there, and there's old metallithic tombs. So the island itself is like, you know, full of culture and full of history, you know. And there's an old ruin of a church out there as well. So it's a very nice island. I was actually lucky enough to go out there myself this summer. I was camping there close to it, so it's lovely.
Very cool. There's a lady who is up on the folklore around here, and she said that there was a story about a giant otter in the Turlock on the farm. Now, I haven't seen it in print, but perhaps it's a fable that kind of crops up here and there. And I think she was saying that there were so many drownings. Drowning was the number one cause of death for a long time, because people obviously were down at the water, they're washing their clothes, they were getting water, and their clothes were so heavy they were getting soaked in water and pulling them in. So maybe some fables of stories like what happened. Oh yes, it was that dreadful dog otter that pulled her in.
Well, there was also a story I remember hearing about. It was because there is these stories along the west coast apparently of the dobhar-chú or whatever it's called, and apparently there was an old farmer that found his wife that was drowned in a lake. You know, a similar story where the daughter dragged her in. And there was another story about a guy who was coming home from the pub one night, and he fought off a giant dog otter with a knife, you know.
With a few pints in it. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd believe him.
I don't think his account is very credible, unfortunately.
Did he have a witness?
No, I think he might have just been fighting himself maybe on the way up from the pub.
Oh, that's really funny. Do you have any profound experience in nature that in your life that you'd like to tell us about, or spiritual kind of encounter?
I suppose, like, I've been very lucky being an ecologist, like looking at, like, I've been surveyed the Clarny Lakes, I've surveyed Loch Corrib, with the EPA in that, and there has been moments where I've gone, wow, I'm so lucky to have a job like this and to be out in nature. And I do find that a very grounding experience. I feel like, that and when I used to live in cities, I'd feel like I'd have to get out to, to a hike or go out to a lake or trying to reconnect with nature, because I do feel like it has that relaxing, feeling when you do go out in nature. So I think it's kind of in all of us, I suppose, to have that want every so often. So I would say that, getting out in nature is probably the most beneficial thing you can do. It's like almost like a pre-meditative mental health service that we can have, I know we were looking at a report that came out with QMBO, another organisation that operates around Kinvara, and they looked at the benefits of getting out into blue spaces, and how that could relate to, actually an economic cost for the country, because it prevents people from, I suppose, mental illness in one way, and we've all heard from sea swimmers and swimmers in general about the benefits of getting out into the water. And I do find that, like, we live close enough here to Westport, and during the summer, most evenings we could get, when the evenings were long, we were going out for swims and that, and it's really re-zeros you. I feel like I'm really refreshed after doing that, and also when I see wildlife, there's nothing better than that connection with, and it kind of stops you in your tracks and re-energizes you. It must be some sort of kind of, I don't know, prehistoric thing where you see wildlife and you get that rush of adrenaline, if that's a pine marten or if that's an otter or if that's a kingfisher flying down a riverbank, so I definitely do think that there's something spiritual there.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, there's so many things I want to say there. But I mean, I totally agree that water can, for one thing, can just wash away your troubles. And I was in Galway City in the docks recently. So, built up, there's a big crane lifting steel into a mountain of steel. And I saw a kingfisher.
Wow.
And you just know that little blue kind of dart, and it gets you right in the heart. And you're like, oh, what's it doing? And it's a good sign.
It is, yeah. No, it's great, yeah.
Yeah. And even just before the podcast, I had sort of 20 minutes, and I was trying to set up the email on the phone, and it was doing my head in. And I poor people who work in IT all the time, because I'd only been at it for about sort of half an hour. And I thought, have I got time to just go outside and have a quick walk around? And I feel completely better after that. But the IT frazzles your head, and it gets you into your head, doesn't it? So you're it
does. I don't know what it's about when you do get outside, then you the fresh air, and it takes a while. It takes like a five minutes or so for you to actually settle down and start. I follow Ray Mears's book on Audible. He's the tracker from BBC, and he's done lots of different programs, and he talks about that, when you go out into ecology and an old boss, or into the environment, and an old boss of mine, you say this as well, you kind of need to settle yourself in the environment, let the nature actually get used to you, like let the birds get used to you, so they'll start appearing, whereas like if you just walk through nature and you're not really connected with it, you won't see as much, so you kind of have to let it nearly come to you almost.
That's actually a really good tip, just to give it a few minutes and settle in and sort of blend into its own energy or whatever it is, rather than, because as you walk down a path, you're frightening everything away anyway, because it's going, human.
Get out of its way. Very much so.
Do you have, so what could you suggest for people to help nature or support the environment? Anything perhaps to do with rivers, or it doesn't have to be anything at all?
Yeah, I suppose like conversations, I suppose, are the big thing, having conversations at the dinner table, and like it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to be, out pounding the streets, but it's the little kind of wins, and I suppose, and raising awareness about certain topics. And some people might have interest in water, some people might have interest in biodiversity and the bees and etc. But it's all really linked. And I suppose it's just trying to raise that awareness generally with the public in the wider remit. So it's just having conversations with people, I suppose, is the one thing that we would try and encourage. And we try and with our organisation, it was kind of part of the Water Framework Directive. And what the Water Framework Directive, it's kind of a unique piece of legislation where it has all communities and everybody having a direct say in how their waters are managed. And one thing that we have coming up that is called the River Basin Management Plan consultation, and that's a plan, I suppose, that we haven't decided upon, but the department have decided upon, about how we manage our rivers and lakes. So we'll be out canvassing people for those views, for their opinions in the next, I suppose, 6 months. And we had hoped to do that in person, but now it's going to be done through Zoom. And we will be doing some stakeholder meetings as well to try and really get from the community what they see as the major issues and how we resolve them.
Yeah.
So conversations and keeping it up, in people's minds is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I think that's really great what you're doing, sort of conversations rather than preaching at people. And even this course that you're doing now, you could see it's a variety of people that are on it, from young people to old people, but they're all desperate to tell what's happening in their area, and all the things that they're worried about and concerned about. They want to give it a voice. So it's great that it's sort of an interactive kind of a process.
Yeah, like we'd be very much a ground up organization, like people on the ground. Go back to the citizen science work as well. People on the ground have just as much to say in the conversation as the agencies, as the scientists, because they're out there every day experiencing it, and they've the long term view of it as well. So it's very much something that we try and kind of promote. That ground up approach, that collaborative approach. If it's a plan or a project, trying to work with the community on it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one as well, because it can raise hackles. Some people along, say, one river section might be saying, oh, well, there's a dairy farm up there and there's an outlet into the river and that's causing pollution. And then, of course, the dairy farmer has to support himself, and that's not very... he doesn't want people reporting him to the, so it is all very kind of
that's it is. It is, yeah, and I suppose we try and support the wins we can, I suppose, help. We have a project in Headford, even, let's say, that where the anglers are working with the farmers on a tree planting project. So and then we have a catchment science team as well that identify significant pressures in, maybe it could be agricultural areas, it could be forested areas, but they identify the issue and they work with the farmer. Because 9 times out of 10, people just want to do the thing that's right, and if they get the right kind of supports, and that's usually just advice, that it'll turn around. So we would work with Teagasc quite a lot on identifying where the issue might be, and then Teagasc goes in as the trusted intermediary in terms of the farming community to give them tips and tricks on how they can improve things on their farm, and then possibly then we can come in with communities and provide a catchment based kind of idea, and one thing we try and focus on is identify or telling people that we're all in a catchment, and we all have a role to play in, I suppose, improving things for water quality.
It's very easy to kind of ignore your own septic tank because you don't want to spend 10,000 fixing it, but you might have a well next door to it, or the neighbour might have a well next door to it. Things out of sight, out of mind is a bit of a hard one. But there's a fabulous project in New Zealand that the seal sanctuary lady, Melanie Croce, they're kind of trying to copy this, And it was the fishermen in New Zealand that found that their catch had suddenly gone completely down. And it's very fertile kind of hill lands coming down into that bay. And they realized that there was pollution coming from the farms. So they worked with all the farmers up the hills, planting trees in, they call them, isn't it, riparian corridors.
Yeah, that's it.
And yeah, and they had a very simple, it's been going on for sort of 20 years or something, very simple way of testing. It was just like, how much did they catch? And then the catch went up, and up, and and the farmers were happy to plant the trees. And so there was no digging, no drainage, no, fining anybody. They just sorted it out naturally. So they're actually, the seal sanctuary in Wexford is doing a project planting trees on river banks and things to try and help the ocean, basically.
Yeah. That's excellent. That's great to hear those good news stories. Like that's something that we'd love to kind of harness, I suppose, in Galway here. And we work with as I was saying, we work with angling groups quite a lot, and they have connections with the local community, to identify those projects. And we've a community water development fund actually that we can help communities source, the materials. So we could source the plants or the trees or the bit of fencing that might need to be done. But we also kind of liaise with the different relevant agencies to ensure, like, say the farmer might not get, penalised, so they can still retain their single farm payment in that, which is a big, part to play in it. So we're not, saying to the farmer that you might reduce your productivity or reduce your payments, that you can work around that, and
it's a win-win.
It's a win-win. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously in this area of Galway, there has been flooding issues and some houses have been flooded over the years. And there were some other drains historically that have become blocked. And we also have a motorway. So, the whole floodwater thing has changed. But they're desperately trying to cut channels to get the water out to the sea. And I'm trying to look back up the hills, up to Derry Bryan, and think, where could we actually add more trees to stop the floods actually coming down? So I'd love them to look at it from both points of view.
Yeah, it's the Gort floods it's a very tricky situation, I suppose. Like on one hand, you have communities that are, worried through its end because, they're potentially, might get flooded. And it's there's some houses there that have been there 200 years and they've never been flooded. And we have this added complication of climate change and the volume of water. I do know for that particular assessment that they looked at upstream measures, because I was talking to the council about this, and I was talking to Matt McDonald, the consultants, and they looked at it. Unfortunately, they said that the level of input wouldn't be enough to guarantee, and I suppose that's the thing, they have to guarantee to the locals that there'll never be a flooding incident again. So I think when they did their multi-criteria analysis, that this was the only solution, unfortunately, at this occasion. But it is something that we're trying to work on. I know I'm working with a group in the uplands there in the Sleeve-Octies, the Avon-Dulica group, and they're carrying out citizen science projects on. They've done lots of different surveys. They're learning more about their woodland there. And what they're hoping to do eventually is plant more native woodland, because a lot of it is quite heavily forested. So that's a nice project that we're working on at the minute. At the minute, they're just trying to really establish what's going on up there and see where they can incorporate more native woodland. So they're doing the kick sampling and they're testing out those methods up there. So that's hopefully something that we can work with, that eventually we might be able to restore some of that native woodland.
Yeah, and that might feed into to help the flooding, even though we're going to have these big drains built anyway. But to hit it from both kind of tactics. Yeah,
very much so. And I think the agencies are very much looking towards green solutions now. Like, we were involved with the Caro office, the climate change office, on training for local authorities on flood risk management, and we would have shown them different case studies from the Donegal in a Shown Trust on natural flood management, because natural flood management has multiple benefits for water quality as well, and habitats, biodiversity, and that. So the conversations, I suppose, are changing, I suppose. What we're unfortunately in Ireland, we're at a stage now where we have a couple of case studies, but we don't have the large scale catchment natural flood mitigation to point to data where we can show this has worked in this catchment, so unfortunately we're a little bit behind the curve in an Irish context on that. But you'll probably need a sea change in the next while to get that data, so when the engineers are making their assessments, they can go, this will guarantee that the communities won't have a flooding of that sort of magnitude. So we're unfortunately a little bit way off that yet, but something that us in LAWPRO are working towards is trying to get those I suppose exemplar projects off the ground, so we can point towards then in the future.
That's great. Yeah, that would be wonderful to have that data. And even, as you said, the conversations around, because we have a new river walk at Gort, which is really lovely. And there's it's a big community project, and it's fantastic. It's a great new amenity for the village, and everyone's coming from far and wide to do the river walk. There may be a little misunderstanding about biodiversity and that, how the river is a corridor for biodiversity, because now it's like, oh, clear it, we want to see the view, let's get rid of all this bushy stuff. So I think the conversations, not preaching or anything, just people are genuinely interested and they want to do the right thing, as you say. So, just to get the conversations flowing about that.
Yeah, and there's always a balance to be struck there, and we would very much promote like reconnect to people with waterways, and but I suppose doing that in a sustainable way is and that's where we try and, I suppose, work with communities. We're working with a community in Ockram on a climate action park. We would have funded a feasibility study where they can they kind of came to us with a set plan of what they wanted to do, but it was very much hard engineered structures. And now we've kind of worked with an ecologist there to let the sections of the site reboiled and avoid some of the more important areas, like there was a wet grassland on site that we're avoiding now, and we're working with establishing a native hay meadow on site, which was the native habitat that probably would have been there for generations before it. So that they're kind of like the avenues where our organisation LAWPRO can get in and work with communities on.
That sounds amazing. I mean, obviously in this area it's difficult because we have limestone. The river disappears at one point. You can't really plant trees on limestone pavement. So it's all very weird and wonderful here, with rivers popping up and going away. So different projects don't work in different places.
Yeah, and that's it. We, like EPA and ourselves, have this saying, the right measure in the right place,
Right.
And it's trying to identify that. Largely, sometimes in karst landscapes or landscapes where you have groundwater, sometimes the best thing is to do nothing in them, and to let nature, do what it had been doing. I suppose that's what the Burren Life project has been successful. It's kind of re-established the previous practices on the karst landscape. The way the people have been farming for generations.
Absolutely.
It's a tricky one. The karst.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. Do you have a book you'd like to recommend to the listeners?
The one that I read was now it's not really great for the Irish context, I suppose, but it is inspirational what can be done, in the I suppose we're talking about adversity, and I suppose Isabella Tree's wilding on the Net Farm. I just for, I suppose, people who they didn't really have the ecology background, or they weren't experts or whatever, but they seen that their system of agriculture was unfortunately not the way to go anymore. And through, I suppose the last resort, they decided to rewild the whole farm and the multiple different benefits that came off that. So it's a very inspirational book, and it's something that I learned quite a lot from.
It's a great book, isn't it? And I mean, it was a risk. They had no data to go off. They really didn't know what they were doing, and it's been just such a monumental success. And people are copying, like you've got Randall Plunkett up in Meath, rewilding his estate, and it catches on then.
And I suppose they kind of changed the way the agencies dealt with these kind of projects in the UK. They were able to show them that they've brought biodiversity back into the area, but they're also actively farming it as well. And it changed the schemes in place for the likes of them. So now they get funding for what they're doing. So it was it's a really nice story, and what of adversity, I suppose.
Yeah, and massive. And if you had that magic wand, what would you like to do for the planet? You could cast a spell.
If only. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think it's one. It's a silver bullet solution. Like I've often talked to people, and you hear about why is this river, deterioration, why is this area deterioration, and it's the death by 1,000 cuts. It's the multiple different pressures from all areas of society. But I suppose one thing that we hopefully are changing the conversation on is this idea of ecosystem services. And when we make decisions on a catchment scale or on a land management scale, that the multiple benefits from a healthy functioning catchment, such as clean water, the mental health benefits that we were talking about earlier on, the commerce and tourism benefits, that they are considered at a wider scale. And we now have tools such as environmental net gain and biodiversity net gain, and the Encase project that's working in an Irish context to, I suppose, bring this all together, and for planners and developers and people at powers that be, I suppose, to identify that there's all these multiple benefits in terms of biodiversity and ecology working together.
Putting a value on it that isn't actually monetary, but they can actually see the real value of things. Yeah. Wonderful. So is there anything else you'd like to say about your work or your projects, or point us in the direction of your websites, but anything else interesting that's going on at the moment?
Well, I suppose I touched on the river-based management plan, so that's an avenue where communities will be able to have their say. What we had hoped to do was have one in each municipal district. Now it probably will be done through Zoom, so maybe if people keep an eye out on that. If you go to LAWPRO.ie, you'll be able to find out about future events. You can also click on our virtual consultation room, because we're living in a virtual world these days. And you can see all the maps and presentations and information on the river-based management plan. And we'd like you to have your say, really, and input on that. And if anybody has any queries or questions on it, you can give me an email. My email address is on the website, so you can scroll down to all the different community water officers and see which one is relevant for your area. I cover Galway and South Roscommon. My colleague Rory O'Connor covers Clare, Limerick, and North Tipperary. So some of your listeners might be listening in from Clare. So check out the website, check out what we do, maybe come to one of our next events. And apart from that, you can join a group. There's lots of our community groups, tidy towns groups, different groups that are crying out for help and volunteers. So if there's anybody with an interest in water and biodiversity, I'd suggest you join a local group.
Really great. Thanks so much. We'll put all those links in the show notes, and the website and the email address and everything. And I hope to get Kieran on to explain how we did the actual citizen science water testing on the course. So hopefully he'll be able to come on and do a little bit on that, because that was great fun and very interesting. So thank you so much, Conor, giving a voice for the waterways, and we'll keep in touch. And if there's anything going on, we can put a little notice on the podcast as well, just to get everybody involved, and as you said, start the conversations.
Great. It was a pleasure, Mary. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Nature Magic. We have exciting news this week at Burren Nature Sanctuary. We have submitted planning for 5 off-grid eco-cabins, beautifully designed to have no impact on the landscape. We hope Galway County Council will grant approval. There have been a number of hoops to jump through to produce an acceptable application, and there will probably be a few more, but cross fingers for a positive result. Please subscribe to the podcast and write a review to boost our ratings. Thank you.